Every hunter knows the wilderness can turn on you in an instant. These 6 stories come straight from the backcountry. Encounters from men who know their rifles, read sign like second nature, and don't rattle easily. But out there, deep in the timber and high on those ridges, they faced more than they bargained for. Predators, the unforgiving land, and sometimes something they couldn't explain. Jake Palmer had been hunting for nearly 20 years, each year sharpening his skills, each season adding to his experience. The 45-year-old was a man of few words, but in the forest he was a whisper, able to read the land like few others. His hunting rifle, a .300 Winchester Magnum, was always with him, his tool of survival and precision. On this chilly November morning, the Canadian wilderness around him was still and quiet as he stalked through the dense pines, looking for signs of black bears preparing for winter hibernation. Jake was far from a novice. He knew the telltale signs of bear tracks, the broken branches that indicated a bear's passing, and the soft, almost imperceptible sounds of the forest that spoke to him. This area of British Columbia had been his hunting ground for years, and he felt a connection to it deeper than he did to most people. The calm of the forest, the crisp air, and the solitary nature of hunting moose, elk, and bear gave him peace, even if it came at the cost of occasional danger. That morning, as the sun was just beginning to break over the treetops, Jake found himself tracking a massive black bear. The creature had been active, foraging and preparing for the long winter months ahead. From the tracks he'd found, it was clear the bear was big, much bigger than any black bear Jake had seen before. It wasn't unusual for bears in this region to grow large, but this one seemed to have an air of authority, a dangerous presence that even Jake couldn't ignore. He had been trailing the bear for nearly 3 hours, each step slow and measured. His .300 Winchester Magnum rifle held tightly in his hands, ready for the moment he'd have to make his shot. The bear had been elusive, leading him deeper into the forest. But as the sun rose higher, Jake finally spotted it, a massive black form emerging from the tree line, its thick fur glistening in the morning light. His heart raced. He crouched low, his breath steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. He knew this was a rare opportunity, one that required a perfect shot to bring down such a creature. His hand tightened on the rifle's stock as he slowly inched forward, keeping his eyes trained on the bear, which was foraging among the fallen leaves and branches. It didn't notice him at first, but Jake knew it would soon. The wind was on his side, but the bear's keen sense of smell would catch him soon enough. He moved into position, the rifle's scope dialed in perfectly as the crosshairs settled on the bear's broad back. The bear paused, lifting its head as if sensing something amiss, but it didn't move. Jake exhaled slowly and squeezed the trigger. The shot rang out, breaking the silence of the forest. The bear let out a deep growl, staggered but didn't fall. It turned toward Jake, its black eyes filled with fury. The impact of the bullet had struck its shoulder, but the beast was still standing, a sight that sent a chill down Jake's spine. It charged faster than Jake could have imagined. The bear's massive paws hit the ground with a thundering force as it barreled through the underbrush. Jake's mind raced. He quickly adjusted, raising the rifle to fire again. He squeezed the trigger, the shot ringing through the air. This time it hit the bear in the chest, but the beast barely flinched. Jake's pulse spiked. He had never seen a bear react like this before. The second shot should have done more damage, should have slowed it down, but it didn't. The bear was enraged now, its eyes locked onto him with a terrifying determination. Jake had only moments before the bear would reach him. His mind flashed to the stories he'd heard of hunters being mauled, their rifles useless against such power. He couldn't let that happen. The third shot went wide, missing the mark. Jake's breath was heavy, his movements frantic. He swung the rifle back into position, adjusting his stance as the bear closed the distance. The bear was less than 15 feet away now, its massive form blocking out the sun. Jake aimed once more and fired, hitting the bear's side. The bear roared in pain, but it kept coming. The power in its charge was unimaginable, and Jake knew that if it reached him, there would be no escape. He had no time to reload. With no choice, he turned and sprinted backward, his boots crunching over the frozen earth as he tried to put distance between himself and the charging predator. His heart pounded in his chest, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He could hear the bear behind him, its growls echoing through the trees, the earth shaking beneath the weight of its pursuit. Jake reached a small clearing where he could finally take a breath. His hands fumbled with the rifle as he quickly reloaded, his mind racing. The bear was almost upon him. With a final desperate effort, Jake fired the 5th shot, then the 6th, striking the bear in the chest and the leg. The bear faltered, its charge weakening, but it wasn't enough to stop it. It lurched forward again, slower now, but still a threat. Jake wasn't sure if he'd make it out alive, but he fired again, this time aiming at the bear's head. The 7th bullet found its mark. The bear collapsed with a violent thud, its body crumpling to the ground. Jake stood there, breathless, his heart racing as the adrenaline slowly ebbed away. The forest, which had been filled with the sound of chaos, fell silent once again. He couldn't believe what had just happened. 7 bullets, but only after an intense life-or-death struggle had he brought the beast down. As the reality of the moment set in, Jake felt a wave of exhaustion wash over him. The bear's massive body lay still, but the fight had taken everything out of him. He approached the animal slowly, his rifle still ready in case it wasn't truly dead. The bear was massive, easily one of the largest black bears Jake had ever seen. Its fur was matted with blood, and its eyes, once filled with fury, were now vacant. Jake exhaled, a mix of relief and respect in his heart. This hunt had been like no other. Cody Madsen had hunted the snowy mountains of western Montana for over a decade. At 37, he knew the rhythm of the wild better than most. He was cautious, methodical, and deeply respectful of the land. That January, the bitter cold had arrived early, covering the terrain in deep snow and pushing moose down into the lower valleys. Cody had scouted for 2 days before finding fresh sign, tracks, rubs, and droppings, all pointing to a large bull moving alone near a half-frozen creek deep in Blackstone Forest. He packed light but smart. A Browning X-Bolt in .300 Winchester Magnum rode on his shoulder. His sidearm, a Glock 20 loaded with 10mm, sat snug in his chest holster. He wore snow camo over insulated gear, his pack stocked with water, a jet boil, emergency bivvy, and some trail food. The temperature hovered around 10 degrees when he slipped into the forest before dawn, crunching softly over the crusted snow. By noon, the light had gone flat, clouds thickening overhead. He'd seen fresh tracks near the edge of a meadow and slowed to glass the tree line. That's when he felt it. Something was off. The forest had gone too quiet. No ravens, no wind, just a strange stillness that made his gut tighten. He turned slowly, scanning the edge of the trees behind him. That's when he saw them. 2 gray shapes crouched low in the snow, ears perked, eyes fixed. Wolves. His heart gave a jolt. He backed away, raising his rifle instinctively. Then more movement. 4 more wolves broke from cover on both sides, forming a crescent. This wasn't curiosity, this was a coordinated approach. Cody had never been afraid of wolves. He admired them. But this was different, this was wrong. He moved backward, trying to stay calm, rifle aimed. The pack didn't flinch. They advanced in unison, heads low, eyes locked. Cody knew turning his back would trigger pursuit. He kept backing up until his boot hit a dip in the snow, and he stumbled. In that second, the wolves charged. He fired once, the shot echoing through the trees. One wolf yelped and tumbled sideways, but the others surged forward. Cody turned and ran, his boots punching through crust into knee-deep snow. Behind him, the growls grew louder, closer. He veered downhill, legs burning as he pushed through brush and drifts, the rifle bouncing on its sling. He reached a small ravine and dropped in, sliding on his back, gripping his Glock now. At the bottom, he scrambled to his feet and sprinted along the frozen stream bed. Breath exploded in clouds as he ran. His heart hammered, not from exertion, but from the primal realization that he was being hunted. A snarl to his left made him spin. A gray blur lunged from the snow. He fired once, twice. The wolf crashed into the bank, tumbling limp. Another came from behind. Cody turned and fired again, but the shot went wide. The wolf closed the distance and slammed into him, jaws snapping. He hit the ice hard, rolling as he drove his forearm into the animal's throat. He shoved the wolf back and fired point blank into its chest. The body went limp atop him. Blood soaked into his parka as he shoved it off, then scrambled up the slope, boots slipping. He reached the top, gasping, shaking, and ran again. The pack wasn't done. 2 more wolves came flanking from the tree line. They were driving him, herding him like elk. He realized they were pushing him away from high ground into a deeper part of the forest. Smart. He respected the intelligence even as it terrified him. He fired at the lead wolf, clipped its shoulder, but it didn't stop. He pushed faster, lungs burning, legs numb. He reached a patch of deadfall and ducked inside, crawling beneath frozen logs. He steadied his pistol and waited, heart thudding so loud he thought the wolves could hear it. They circled. One moved past his position but didn't see him. Another poked its head near the opening. He fired. The wolf crumpled, blocking the entrance. Cody backed up deeper into the mess of limbs and trunks. He couldn't stay here. Night was coming. The temperature would drop below zero. He had to get out. He checked his phone. No signal. But he saw he was less than 2 miles from the fire road where his truck was parked. If he could reach it, he might make it. He crawled from the log pile and sprinted again. The wolves were regrouping. He heard their howls, one long and high-pitched, answered by others. They weren't giving up. He crossed another clearing and risked looking back. 3 wolves in pursuit, jaws open, eyes locked on him. His lungs ached, his thighs on fire. He jumped over a snow-covered stump and nearly lost his footing, but kept running. Ahead, the tree line opened. The fire road was closed. He could see the break in the trees. He pushed everything he had into the final sprint. One wolf came alongside, teeth flashing. Cody swerved, raised the Glock, and fired. The wolf yelped, but another tackled him from the side. He went down hard. The wolf's teeth clamped onto his arm, ripping through the jacket. Pain exploded through him. He screamed, flipped onto his back, and jammed the Glock against its ribs. He fired 3 times. The wolf dropped, convulsing. His arm throbbed, blood seeping into the snow. He forced himself to his feet. The other wolves stood at the edge of the clearing, watching. They didn't cross the boundary. Whether it was the road or the noise or some unseen line, they stayed back. Cody stumbled onto the fire road, dragging his rifle, bleeding and shaking. He reached his truck, fumbled the keys with numb fingers, and collapsed into the driver's seat. The wolves were gone. The nightmare was over. He sat there for a long time, heart still pounding, the forest silent around him. He had always respected the wild, but now he understood what it meant to be prey. The pack had been smart, aggressive, and terrifyingly coordinated. If he hadn't kept his head, kept moving, kept fighting, they would have taken him. He stared at his torn jacket and bloody arm, then looked out at the empty road. This was a hunt he'd never forget. Brandon Lewis had hunted the forests of northern Maine for years, but this was his first solo trip that deep into the North Woods. The 34-year-old had grown up around deer stands and duck blinds and spent most of his adult life balancing his job as a machinist with his passion for wilderness. This particular October, he had taken a week off to bow hunt whitetail in a stretch of timber near the Silver Pine Wilderness. He packed light, brought his Hoyt RX-7 bow, and planned to bivy deep inside for 3 nights to avoid pressure from other hunters. The first day went smoothly. He hiked in early, set up a small camp near a dry creek bed, and scouted several natural funnels. Rub lines and fresh scrapes told him bucks were moving through. The air smelled of damp leaves and pine, the cold, clean bite of autumn settling in his lungs. Brandon felt good. This was what he lived for: quiet, solitude, and the raw challenge of bow hunting. On the second evening, just after dusk, things began to feel off. He had climbed down from his hang-on stand and started walking back to camp with his headlamp on low beam. The forest was still, too still. Even the wind had stopped. No crickets, no owls, just silence. At first he thought nothing of it, but then he noticed something strange, the feeling that he was being watched. Not the way you feel when you're just jumpy. This was something deeper, older, like the woods themselves had turned against him. He scanned the trees. Nothing moved, but every 20 steps or so he swore he heard a branch shift. Not snapping, just that subtle creak like something adjusting its weight. He stopped, turned off his light, and stood perfectly still. There was breathing. Heavy, controlled, not his. He turned fast, heart hammering, arrow already nocked. But the light revealed nothing. The trail behind him was empty. He moved quicker back to his camp, listening, feeling the hairs on his arms rise despite the thick jacket. He didn't sleep much that night. Every time he dozed off, he woke up with that same pressure on his chest, like something was crouched just outside the tarp, watching. Morning came gray and slow. Fog hung low, swirling between the trees. Brandon packed up and moved to a new area 2 ridges over, hoping the feeling would go away, but it didn't. Around midday, he spotted fresh deer tracks and followed them along a faint game trail. The forest here grew darker, tighter. Hemlocks closed in overhead and the sun was reduced to a dull silver glow above the mist. He found the clearing by accident. It was circular, almost too clean, the ground oddly bare in the center. No deer sign, no squirrel chatter, nothing. And in the middle was a structure, branches and logs stacked into a crude cone, maybe 4 feet high. Not a blind, not a hunting shelter, just there, twisted together. Wrong. He approached it slowly, bow ready. His instincts screamed to turn back, but he stepped closer. Around the structure were stones, small ones placed in a ring. Each stone had a mark carved into it. The symbols didn't look native or modern, just jagged, intentional, angry. He backed away fast, heart pounding, every cell in his body telling him this was not for him. That night he camped farther away, closer to a frozen marsh. He built a fire, something he rarely did when hunting, but the fear creeping in had overridden stealth. The flames offered little comfort. That's when he saw them, 2 glowing eyes, high off the ground, watching from behind a spruce 30 yards away. Brandon froze, gripping his bow, but the eyes didn't blink. They didn't move, just hung there, too far apart for a deer, too high for a bear. He couldn't see a body, just the eyes, yellow-white like reflections, but steady, intelligent. He stood, arrow knocked. The fire crackled behind him. The eyes vanished. He scanned the woods in every direction. His hands shook. He'd hunted mountain lions, spooked moose, and been treed by a sow black bear once in his 20s. Nothing ever made him feel this kind of dread, not even close. The eyes returned an hour later, this time closer, lower. He didn't sleep. By morning he was done. He packed his gear fast, stuffed everything haphazardly, and didn't care about breaking camp quietly. Something had been watching him for 2 days, maybe longer, and it wasn't a deer, it wasn't a predator. He didn't want to name it, he didn't want to guess. He began the hike out, moving fast despite the weight of his pack and bow. The trail was rougher than he remembered. Trees he didn't recognize stood where he swore they hadn't been. Game trails were missing. The forest was shifting under his feet, unfamiliar and endless. At some point after miles of hiking, he saw it again. The eyes. They were still in shadow, barely visible in the gloom beneath a cluster of old-growth pines, but they were there. Tall, still, watching him move, as if judging whether to follow or finish whatever game this was. Brandon didn't stop. He pushed through the brush, ignored the growing ache in his legs, and ignored the stinging in his lungs. He just kept going, kept moving, and kept praying he would see the old logging road that led back to the trailhead. Hours later, he broke through the trees and into the gravel pull-off where his truck was parked. He didn't breathe until the engine turned over and he was rolling away down the mountain. He didn't report anything. He didn't tell the rangers. But he never went back. Not to that part of the woods, not after seeing those eyes. Darren Sloan had hunted Colorado's San Juan Mountains for over 15 years, each season carving new paths into the map of his memory. He was the kind of hunter who didn't just know the land. He respected it, moved with it, and understood its moods. October's second rifle season had always been his favorite, when the aspens had already dropped their leaves and the cold crept into the dark timber, pushing the elk lower into the basins and side valleys. On this trip, he'd been in for 3 days, and though the weather had held steady and the sign was promising, he had yet to lay eyes on a bull close enough to glass clearly. That morning, just after sunrise, Darren found fresh tracks cutting through a shallow dip just west of a saddle he'd crossed the night before. The prints were clean and wide, pressed into a light dusting of snow that had fallen during the early hours. From the stride and depth, he knew it wasn't just any bull. It was a mature animal, probably a heavy 6x6, moving alone and unhurried. The blood rushed to his limbs as instinct and experience surged together, and before he thought to mark his bearings or drop a waypoint, he was already following. The elk's trail wound uphill into a thicker part of the forest where the canopy closed tighter and the light dimmed. The farther he moved, the quieter everything became. The normal sounds of a living forest, squirrels chattering, birds fluttering, even the soft hiss of wind through branches began to vanish. He noticed it gradually, like a song fading out mid-verse, until all that remained was the rhythmic crunch of his boots in snow and the distant echo of his own breath. Still, he pressed on. His Weatherby .300 Winchester Magnum rode comfortably over his shoulder, and his pack was stocked with enough gear to bivvy if needed. He had confidence, sharpened by years of solo hunts, but something about the silence began to gnaw at the edges of that confidence, wearing it down bit by bit. Around midday, the trail curved into a draw thick with windfall and clustered pines, and that's where he realized he had lost the elk. The prints, so clear just moments before, had vanished across a rocky patch where the snow thinned out. He paused, scanning the ground, trying to find where the bull had picked up again, but nothing showed. He circled wide. Still nothing. That was when he tried to pull up his global positioning system. The screen lit up, then flickered, the signal bar flashing red before disappearing altogether. It had worked fine that morning. Now it was useless. He looked up and realized he didn't recognize a single tree around him. Darren knew how disorientation worked. He had talked people out of panic before, told them to stop, breathe, and retrace. But the sky had changed while he was tracking, the sun now low and obscured behind heavy gray, and snow had begun falling again, erasing what little trail he might have followed back. He forced himself downhill, trusting the old rule that water leads to roads. But the slope grew treacherous with ice, and soon he found himself in a narrow ravine filled with twisted trees and jagged rocks. The air in the draw was wrong. Cold, yes, but also dense, as if it had weight, pressing against his chest. He kept walking, slower now, more cautious, each footstep feeling like it echoed too loudly. Then came the sense of being watched. It was not a fleeting thought. It arrived fully formed, pressing on his mind with unmistakable certainty. His skin tightened. He stopped walking and turned slowly, his hand drifting toward the rifle, his heart beating fast in the dead silence. Nothing moved behind him. Nothing made a sound. But someone or something was there. He continued, not running, not showing fear, but every nerve fired as if the forest had shifted into something alive and hungry. And then he saw it. On a flat rise above the creek bed, a boot print. Not his. It was old but defined, pressed into crusted snow and facing toward a patch of thick woods that looked darker than the rest. Next to it was another print. Barefoot. Human. Toes splayed wide. Deep. Impossible in that cold, it made no sense. Then he heard the sound, a sharp, deliberate click. Not a twig breaking or rock falling, but something unnatural like bone tapping against bone. It echoed from the trees beyond the rise, too precise to be random. Darren raised his rifle and backed away. He didn't call out. He didn't investigate. He had spent his life in forests and knew the difference between a predator and something else, something that didn't belong. He moved fast, pushing through alder and snow-covered brush, ignoring the growing weight in his legs and the ache building in his lungs. Trees snapped back at his face, and the cold bit harder now, but the fear that followed him gave more strength than pain could take. Somewhere in the run, he lost all sense of direction again. Everything looked unfamiliar. The timber closed in. Then, by chance or providence, the woods broke open into a flat shelf where a rusted fence post stood crooked beside a half-buried game trail. He knew that fence post. He had passed it 2 days before. He didn't stop to breathe or reflect. He just kept going, following that narrow game trail until it dipped into a familiar drainage, one that eventually spilled out onto the gravel road where his truck waited like a lighthouse at the edge of a storm. Darren didn't sleep that night. Even in the safety of camp, the silence lingered, and in the months that followed, he never spoke of what he saw, but he never hunted alone again. In the quiet wilderness east of Atikokan, Ontario, where thick boreal forest stretches across endless ridges and lakes and the morning mist clings low between the tamarack and spruce, seasoned hunter Grant Holloway had hiked out before dawn, prepared for one of the most difficult solo hunts of the season. He had been drawn for a bull moose tag in Wildlife Management Unit 12B, a zone not easily accessed. And with only 3 days left in the October rifle window, he wasn't about to waste the opportunity. For years he had hunted deer and bear, but getting drawn for bull moose up there felt like winning a quiet kind of lottery only real hunters understand. He was carrying his Tika T3 X Light chambered in .300 Winchester Magnum, a rifle he trusted not just for its accuracy but its reliability in cold, damp conditions. With the rut winding down and the animals growing less vocal, Grant had decided to still hunt, slowly picking his way along an old logging trail where he'd found fresh rubs the evening before. He knew from the track patterns and broken saplings that a mature bull was in the area, likely traveling solo, wary but still prone to midday movement. The wind was right, steady from the west, and the forest lay hushed under a ceiling of thin cloud cover, not quite raining but full of moisture, every step muffled by wet moss and needles. Grant moved with the kind of control that came only from experience, pausing often, glassing every shadow between tree trunks. After 2 hours, just as the trail curved around a dense thicket of poplar and black spruce, he spotted antlers swaying through the brush. The bull was massive. He caught only a partial view, broad back, thick neck, a rack wide and palmed like a shovel, but it was enough. The animal was walking perpendicular to him, roughly 80 yards away, and hadn't caught wind or sound. Grant dropped to a knee slowly, shouldered the rifle, and tracked the moose through the gap. Then everything changed. From somewhere behind him came a low growl, almost inaudible at first, then followed by a second, slightly closer, more distinct. The kind of sound that rips focus from a hunter, no matter how trained, how calm. He turned his head slightly, careful not to move too fast, and that's when he saw them. Wolves, 2 at first, both pale gray, barely visible at the edge of the trail, then a third. They weren't running. They weren't curious. They were spreading out, drifting like mist across the forest floor with purposeful steps. The moose had vanished in the confusion, melting into the trees with the quiet power only a massive animal can manage, but Grant didn't move after it. He knew he couldn't. This wasn't the first time he'd encountered wolves in the wild. He respected them, even admired them, but these weren't acting like normal wolves. They weren't skittish. They weren't backing off. They were studying him. Grant rose to his feet slowly, the rifle still shouldered but not yet aimed. He scanned the tree line. A fourth wolf appeared behind a mossy boulder closer than the rest, staring directly at him with pale, steady eyes. The others closed the half circle. Their silence was unsettling, their lack of fear more so. He began backing up carefully, step by deliberate step, his boot heels sinking into the wet ground, heart pounding with a mix of confusion and calculation. He had bear spray in the left pocket of his vest, but it wouldn't help in this situation, not with 4, possibly more, wolves moving in from multiple sides. Then the largest one, black fur, heavy shoulders, stepped forward from a tangle of brush. It didn't growl, it didn't run, it simply walked closer, bold, testing, head low and ears forward. Grant raised the rifle and aimed center mass, but he didn't fire. Not yet. Part of him hoped the animal would reconsider, would recognize the shape and smell of man and turn away. But it didn't. Instead, it lunged. Grant fired once, the report echoing like thunder in the confined woods. The black wolf tumbled, rolled, then rose again, wounded but still moving. The others reacted instantly. No howls, no frenzy, just sudden motion, silent and strategic, closing in with terrifying coordination. He fired again, this time at the nearest gray one charging from the side. It dropped mid-stride, skidding in the loam. He turned as the wounded black wolf leapt again, closing the distance in seconds, and fired a third shot at near point-blank range. The animal fell hard this time, legs twitching, jaws still bared. Another shape moved at the edge of his vision. Another wolf, unseen until now, coming in fast from the rear. Grant twisted, aimed low, and fired his 4th round just as it launched from a log. The bullet struck, not cleanly, but enough to knock it off balance. Blood now soaked into the pine needles around him. His breathing was wild, ragged, but controlled. Adrenaline blurred the cold, sharpened the noise of every branch, creak, and movement in the shadows. He stood alone in the clearing, rifle smoking, and stared out across the woods. The remaining wolves didn't attack. They stopped, watched, assessed. Then, without sound, they vanished back into the trees, retreating as quietly as they had arrived. Grant didn't move for a long while. He reloaded, scanned, waited. Only when he was certain the danger had passed did he step forward, boots crunching lightly on the blood-slicked forest floor. The bodies were sprawled around him, lean and long, built for endurance and power. They were young, but not pups. They were old enough to kill. When he finally turned to leave, the moose trail was long gone. The bull had slipped away as wild animals do, untouched and free, but the hunt was over. Grant hiked out in silence, rifle tight against his shoulder, his thoughts as heavy as the gray sky pressing low above the trees. He hadn't come looking for a fight that day. He had come for the thrill of the stalk, the honor of the harvest. But the forest doesn't always care what a man comes looking for. The two men had hunted together for over 20 years, through every kind of weather, across the roughest parts of Idaho's salmon chalice backcountry, but nothing either of them had experienced. Not grizzlies at close range, not blizzards, not the time they'd almost gone over a cliff on an all-terrain vehicle could have prepared them for what happened that week in early November. Derek Latham was the older of the pair, lean and sharp-eyed, with the kind of intuition that had kept him alive through decades of remote elk hunts. His friend, Mason Juergens, was younger by 10 years, but just as experienced, a tough, no-nonsense Idaho native who lived for backcountry solitude and prized long hikes into deep terrain no other hunter dared to push. They'd drawn late-season elk tags in a steep, burn-scarred unit on the fringe of the Frank Church Wilderness, a place known for its remoteness and brutal climbs. Snow had come early that year, blanketing the ridgelines and shadowing the valleys with ice, but it had also pushed the elk down. They'd seen fresh sign the day before, tracks, rubs, scat, but hadn't been able to close the distance. That next morning they left camp before first light, climbing a ridge that overlooked a basin where a bull had bugled once just before dark the night prior. The silence that morning was unsettling, not just quiet but dead. No wind, no birds, not even the usual creaks of ice shifting in the trees. The sun rose pale and cold, barely warming their backs as they glassed the far timber. The elk were gone. No tracks, no sound, nothing. By late morning, both men agreed something was off. Derek kept scanning the far ridges, convinced he'd seen something moving between the burned trunks across the basin. But whatever it was disappeared before he could center his scope on it. Mason wasn't so sure it was elk. Whatever he'd glimpsed through the fogged lens of his binoculars moved wrong. Too upright, too fast, almost human in silhouette, but far too large. They decided to hike down into the basin to check for sign. As they dropped elevation, the air thickened. There was no breeze, and the snow underfoot became patchy, mixed with frozen ground and exposed soil. They found nothing, no tracks, no beds, not even birds scratching the forest floor. Then they saw the claw marks, 4 gashes shoulder-high, deep and clean, carved into a charred fur, not from antlers, not from a bear, too wide, too long. Derek stared at them for a long time, his face tight with thought. They moved on, slower now, more alert. Just before noon, they heard something, not movement, but noise. A sound like bone on bark, a slow, dragging scrape that echoed faintly through the dead trees behind them. They turned in unison, rifles ready, eyes searching, but saw only stillness. They kept walking, no longer speaking, and every few minutes they'd hear it again, always behind them, always distant, as if something was pacing them. They quickened their pace, trusting a side drainage that would lead them toward the saddle above camp, but the forest closed in strangely around them. The air grew colder, thicker, harder to breathe, and though they'd hiked that route before, the terrain no longer felt familiar. By the time they reached the saddle, Derek had stopped twice to check the map on his global positioning system. Both times the device locked up, froze, and then powered off despite a full battery. Mason's wouldn't boot at all. They resorted to a compass and memory, neither of which brought comfort in the narrowing light. It was then they saw the figure. Far up the ridge, through a screen of blackened pine trunks, something moved, tall, broad-shouldered, and upright. It stood for a moment, then stepped behind a tree. The movement was fast but heavy, deliberate, and far too quiet. They both saw it. They both froze. Neither of them spoke. They turned and moved quickly, rifles low but ready, pushing hard toward where they believed the trail cut across the slope. As they moved, the noise resumed. Footsteps in snow, faint and padded, following just beyond sight. Every time they stopped, it stopped. When they moved, it resumed. Once Mason turned suddenly and caught a glimpse, a flash of dark fur, something massive ducking behind a tree not 20 yards behind them. There was no sound of breathing, no scent, but it was watching them, hurting them, never attacking but always near. They didn't fire, it never made a move, but it never left. By late afternoon, the temperature dropped sharply and a freezing fog began to creep through the timber. They were sweating hard, even in the cold, nerves rattled, muscles tight from hours of tension. When they finally saw the glint of their tent poles through the fog, half collapsed under the weight of snow, they felt no relief. Something had been through camp. Food bags had been torn open, contents scattered but not eaten. The firewood was gone, not moved, gone, as if it was never there. Around the edge of the camp, boot prints circled, not theirs, larger, barefoot. They broke camp without a word. They packed fast and loaded their rifles. They hiked out under fading light, making their way along the trail in near silence. That scraping sound followed them for almost a mile, always just behind, always stopping when they did. They never saw it again. Back at the truck, under the sodium glow of a gas station hours later, they still didn't talk about it. Not directly. Derek said he wasn't going back to that unit again. Mason agreed. Neither of them logged the encounter with Fish and Game. What would they say? The story didn't make sense. It didn't fit into anything rational, anything wild they knew. But they both remembered the eyes, pale and low, watching through the trees. It was not a bear, not a man, and not anything they could explain. Something else hunted them on that mountain, and it let them leave.